Welcome to Grace Fellowship Baptist Church Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, December 14th, 2022. We are in 1 Samuel chapter 24, and let's start in verse 1. After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, David is in the desert of En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. Now, in chapter 23, David had success defending a city in Israel, and he had then escaped from Saul by consulting with the Lord and the priest and the prophet he has with him. And then he'd gone out to the desert of Maon, and that's in the desert of Ziph, and the men, the Ziphites there, reported Saul, and Saul went and chased him. And when Saul was just about to catch David, and David was working hard to run away, Saul got a message the Philistines were attacking, and he had to go run off and do his job and defend the country instead of chase David down. And so he does, and David gets away. And David decides, okay, if the Ziphites are going to rat me out, I'm going to go out to En-Gedi. And he goes out to En-Gedi, and he's at a place that's called the Crags of the Wild Goats. Now, the name of that can tell you something. Wild goats will climb the side of a cliff. It looks impossible, and they'll climb it. In fact, one of the pictures I've seen, it was a modern dam that was put up, and it looks to be about 85-degree slope and cement, and the goats are just climbing across the face of the dam. I don't even know how they did it. The wild goats can climb some amazing things. Another one that I saw recently, some wild goats were being pursued by hyenas, and they climbed this little rock, probably about a tenth of an acre, a little boulder sitting out in the middle of the wilderness. And it was only maybe 8-10 feet tall. But it was too steep for the hyenas to get up. And they climbed up, even the littlest goats, and they are at the top, and they're just standing up there, nothing to eat, nothing to drink. They're in the sun. They're at night, they would be exposed to the sky, but they're just up there like, ha ha, you can't get us. We're up here. We can last longer up here than you can last down there. You'll eventually get bored and go away. And when y'all go away, then we'll come down and go about our business again. And so the Crags of the Wild Goats, it's a craggy place. It's a steep hill, steep valleys, gullies. Only the goats can come up and down it. And so it's known by the locals and named that because only the wild goats go there. Not even the predators go there to chase the goats. It's just not worth it. Let them have it. And there's little to eat. Nothing grows there. And what little only a goat would want to eat. And the locals know that. And David is staying there. That's how desolate the place is. A place that only wild goats will go. Verse 3, he came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the cave. The men said, This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off the corner of Saul's robe. Now, it's the kind of countryside where the shepherds have to go to some effort to protect their sheep. And they've been out there enough that they've built sheep pens, and they when they don't have the sheep out there, they just kind of leave the sheep pens there. And when they're out there during the time they would flock their sheep, bring their flocks out there, at night they'd put them in the sheep pens, and they'd be able to get some rest because they'd be in there with the sheep. Sheep would be sleeping, and they'd be in the sheep pens, and they would be protected from the wild animals, the wolves and the lions and the bears that were out in that countryside, and they'd be in the sheep pen. And then after dawn, they'd wake up, open the sheep pens, and take the sheep out and go through the countryside during the day, and then bring them back to the sheep pens. And that's the kind of wild countryside it is. Not very habitable, and they can't leave the sheep out there very long. It's not much to eat out there, but it's so desolate they have to protect them when they're there. And so they can't go far from the sheep pen, and they might spend, several weeks out there each night staying in the sheep pen, and then when they've eaten all the vegetation in the area, they got to move to somewhere else to a different sheep pen. That's the kind of countryside it is. And Saul has come to the sheep pens, and there's no shepherds there, no sheep. And he's the kind of guy. Most of the soldiers will be carrying a shovel with them if they need to use the bathroom. You go out behind the bush. Now, everybody knows what you're doing because the bush is that thin. It's like, trying to hide behind a mesquite bush. You're not hidden. Everybody knows you're there. Everybody knows what you're doing. But you get as much price as you can and dig the hole, do your business, cover it up. That's what they did. And but Saul, he's apparently old. It takes longer. It's not easy. So he sneaks into the cave. So he have more privacy, have more time, get it done, and doesn't matter. And this is kind of an amusing story because David and his men are hiding in the cave. They're in the back. And they see Saul up front. And he's silhouetted in a little bit of light. They're in the dark. Of course, it's very quiet in the cave. I can't understand how they can talk to David and Saul not hear. But I think that's of God. And they remind David, hey, David, God promised you he'd give your enemies into his hand. This is your day. He's given Saul into your hand. The implication is go kill him and we'll be done. So David goes up and sneaks up on Saul, and he's a very quiet individual. And with his sword, he cuts off a corner of the cloth of his robe. And Saul doesn't notice. Now, I think that's of God. Let's face it. I can't imagine cutting cloth with a knife. A sword is just a big knife. I don't care how sharp the sword is. It's hard to cut cloth with a knife. There's a reason we don't cut cloth with a knife. We use a pair of scissors. Scissors do a much better job. Of course, scissors make a lot more noise too. I can't imagine how you'd cut cloth without pulling on it enough that Saul would notice. I can't see how Saul is that dense. But God has given Saul into David's hands and has given David a test to see what David is like. Is David really loyal to Saul? Is he going to take things in his own hands? Is he going to do the right thing? Or is he going to do the wrong thing? Well, here David comes in and basically plays a trick on Saul, cuts off a corner of his robe, and that tells us he got close enough to kill Saul. He could have done it. He has a sharp enough weapon. He could have easily done it. And he can be very crafty, very smooth. He can be very silent. He can sneak up on him. He can uh, cut the cut the cloth very quietly, and he takes it back to his men. Verse 5. Afterward, David was conscience stricken for having cut off the corner of his robe. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lift my hand against him, for he is the anointed of the Lord." With these words, David rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went his way. Very amusing. We now know something about David's character. David could have killed Saul directly, but even then, he controlled his men so they didn't go kill Saul. I mean, they knew their life was in danger, that they would die defending David, and Saul would just kill them because they were with David. They knew they were rebels in Saul's sight, and they knew the only um, sentence for being a rebel was death. You either win or you die. They knew that, and they were willing to shorten this fight real much. I mean, it's 300 of us against one. Who's going to win? We're going to win regardless. And once Saul's dead, then the game's over, right? Well, that's just kind of the way they're thinking. And David rebukes them and does not let them attack Saul. And again, I don't know how Saul doesn't hear David rebuking his men, because I can't imagine David being back there whispering, "Now y'all can't attack Saul." I don't see that happening. I see David having to be a military commander and being blunt with them in stern a voice. And he says, "This is God's anointed. It would be evil to attack him. We're not going to do it. I shouldn't have cut off his corner of his robe. I should not have pulled the trick on him. I'm wrong, but we're not going to do him harm." And then he restrains them. Saul leaves the cave. Very comical at this point still. But David's character has now been determined. He is not going to attack Saul, even though Saul's chasing him. Even when God gives him into David's hand that he could kill him easily and without apparent retribution, David will not raise his hand against Saul. He's still loyal to Saul, even though Saul is not loyal to David. And he's depending upon God to bring it about, however this happens. He doesn't understand. He doesn't see. It's a mystery to him. Verse 8. Then David went out of the cave and called out to Saul, "My lord the king?" When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. So David acts like a loyal servant. He obeys. He bows down the way you should to a king. He's trying to indicate, I'm a loyal servant. You're chasing the wrong guy. He said to Saul, "Why do you listen when men say David is bent on harming you? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lift my hand against my master, because he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you. Now understand and recognize that I am not guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I have not wronged you, but you are hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between you and me. May the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me, but my hand will not touch you. As the old saying goes, from evildoers come evil deeds, so my hand will not touch you. Against whom has the king of Israel come out? Whom are you pursuing? A dead dog? A flea? May the Lord be our judge and decide between us. May he consider my cause and uphold it. May he vindicate me and deliver me from your hand." So David comes up and does this speech to Saul, and he's very much a, um, he's downplaying his role. He's very humble, very contrite. He calls himself a dead dog, a flea. Um, those were things that were very abhorrent. The Israelites viewed dogs as unclean, as unhealthy. They didn't keep them as pets. They didn't keep them even as uh, watch animals in their camps. It was just mainly, feral dogs that fed off the scraps in the garbage heaps would be town dogs, they're called. Not loyal to any humans, but a warning system for the city because they were territorial, and if somebody strange showed up, they'd bark and make noise and tell you, "Hey, go look that direction. Is it a wild animal? Is it a stranger? Is it an invading army? Figure out what it is." And but they were viewed as unclean, and a dead one was even more unclean. And the fleas that came off of them were considered unclean. And he's saying, I'm worthless, I'm nothing, and you're chasing me, and I'm loyal to you. See, here's the proof. I've got a corner of your robe in my hand. I could have killed you. I mean, let's face it, if you're close enough to cut off a corner of the robe, and you have a sharp enough weapon to do so without King Saul noticing it, you could easily have killed King Saul. He wasn't paying enough attention. You have a sharp enough weapon, you could easily pierce the robe and kill him. In fact, David probably would have incurred no risk in doing so, except risk from God. But David knew that God would not hold him guiltless. And so he spared Saul's life, and he comes out humble. He bows. He does the correct things for a servant. And he asks for Saul to spare his life. That, he blames. Now, David knows that it's Saul that's in doing this. That he knows from Jonathan that it's not the other generals inciting against David. But David is being kind to Saul and not saying, "Hey, you're chasing me without reason." He's saying, if somebody's inciting you, don't pay attention to what they say. I'm loyal to you. I am not your enemy. Don't listen to them. Don't listen to the counsel of people who would tell you that. And, he knows Saul has some yes men. At this point, Saul probably has mainly yes men around him, telling him what he wants to hear. And Saul is probably in his little echo chamber, we call it now. You stay with your group that says and believes what you believe, and at least they're willing to say in front of Saul what Saul wants to say. And Saul is hearing his paranoia echoed back to him, and he thinks it's advice, but no, it's not really advice. And David is shifting the blame. He's trying to be kind to Saul, and he knows better. The men that hear him know that David knows better, but they also know they've been an echo chamber for Saul and feeding him back his own delusions. Because they got to protect their own neck and not be viewed as a rebel with David. And they have an important position in government, so I got to keep my own position. And they're not going to take offense at David because he's not calling them out by name. I mean, if he did that, then you take offense. But you always say, "Oh, it's him, not me." We all rationalize. And so David is saying it in a general way and saying, "Hey, don't pay attention to this. I'm not the guy. I'm not in rebellion. If I was, you'd be dead. And since you're not, and now here I have proof in my hand, your corner of your robe, you can recognize it. I'm not in rebellion to you. God gave you into my hand, and I didn't kill you." verse 10, or excuse me, verse 16. When David finished saying this, Saul asked, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" And he wept aloud. "You are more righteous than I," he said. "You have treated me well, but I have treated you badly. You have just now told me of the good you did me. The Lord delivered me into your hands, but you did not kill me. When a man finds his enemy, does he let him get away unharmed? May the Lord reward you well for the way you treated me today. I know that you will surely be king, and the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands. Now swear to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants or wipe out my name from my father's family." So Saul has a moment of clarity. He realizes that he has been wrong and that David is not chasing him. And all he asks is that David not do what is common in the countries around them that Saul thinks is going on, that when David becomes king, David will wipe out all the men in the clan of Saul. And that was common. Is a way to keep the old regime, the old dynasty, from coming back to power. If you didn't, very often somebody would come up, and as soon as there was a moment of trouble, they'd rise up rebels, and at least you'd have a civil war. And so it was a common practice, just go in and kill all the men, all the males, uh, from infant boys all the way up, and make sure you did a third job and not let anybody live, so that you would be the only king, and there would be no question of authority and no question of succession, and be you and your family. And so Saul just merely asked that David swear that he won't kill his family. And verse 22. So David gave his oath to Saul, and Saul returned home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. Now, something else that was there is important. Yes, David gave his oath to Saul not to kill Saul's family. But Saul, in front of Saul's men, acknowledged that David would be king, and that God would establish him as king, and that David would rule righteously. In that moment of clarity that Saul had, he quit pursuing David momentarily. We'll come back to that later. But he also knows and publicly acknowledges, and that's why he's so scared of David, is that David will indeed be king. And he gets the other real thing he wants out of David. He wants David to not kill his family. That when he's king, he won't take vengeance on Saul and his family, and Saul's family. And David, being the man that honors God, swore he wouldn't. God gave Saul to David's hand. David refused to harm him. David got a statement from Saul that he would be king, and that David was more righteous than Saul. And Saul asked for and got an oath from David that David would not harm Saul's family. Very important set of statements in development. We know that Saul is unstable at this point. He had a moment of clarity. Later, he's going to be back to his old ways, scared of David. You know, last chapter he chased him around the mountain, and David barely got away. You know, now he's got away again because God has, you know, protected him. God has been protecting David the whole time, and now David has been again protected. Philistines attacked the land. Now he's shown Saul personally, "I'm not after you." But David doesn't trust him. He goes up to the stronghold. He goes up to the top of the mountain, top of the hill, where it's easy to defend and to stay. Holy Father, have us to be righteous like David, that we would not do harm to others, that we would indeed do good to others, and we would show our loyalty, that we would live righteously, that even when others are unrighteous to us, we will be righteous to them. Have us to point that kind of thing out, that others would know that we are righteous, and that, like David did here in front of his men and Saul's men, gave an oath that he would not harm Saul's family. And Saul, in turn, promised not to harm David, but we know that Saul tries again. But you protected him. Lord, have us to be that kind of people like David was, who understand what's right and wrong, and we do the right thing. In your holy name, amen. I am your host, Frank Reich, Associate Pastor of Family and Ministry at Grace Fellowship Baptist Church. And today is Monday, December 19th. And this is recorded after the Wednesday evening Bible study last week, obviously. I have something I'm trying, and we'll see how it works. And this, like last week's lesson recorded just a few minutes ago, I'm going to try it to see if it works. I hope to see you Sunday, or if, because Oscar has a really good sermon series starting. I hope to see you Wednesday evening, where we'll be discussing chapter 25. And if not, I'll see you here on YouTube. You have a blessed week. Have a Merry Christmas.